The air in the emergency department of North Haven General was a stagnant cocktail of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the low electric hum of anxiety. Fluorescent lights, relentless and humming, bleached all color from the linoleum floors and the tired faces of the staff. It was a kingdom of controlled chaos, a place where minutes were measured in heartbeats and the currency was clean gauze. For Alara Vance, it was supposed to be a sanctuary of anonymity, a place so loud and frantic that the ghosts of her past would be drowned out by the symphony of everyday crisis. She moved through this kingdom with a deliberate, almost painful slowness. Her current task was simple: mopping up a spilled cup of orange juice near the triage desk. Her hands, which could field strip a rifle in the dark or suture a femoral artery under fire, fumbled with the cheap plastic handle of the mop. Her posture was a carefully constructed apology, shoulders stooped, eyes downcast, making her seem smaller than she was. To the casual observer, she was the new ER tech, the quiet one, maybe a little slow on the uptake, the one you had to repeat instructions to. This persona was a shield, forged in the fires of places she no longer named. Places like the Koringal Valley, where the air tasted of dust and cordite, and the only color was the khaki of the mountains and the crimson of blood. Inside her mind, the slow, rhythmic slosh of the mop was a metronome counting off tactical assessments. The main entrance was a fatal funnel. 2 viable secondary exits, one partially blocked by a gurney. The security guard was overweight, his sidearm poorly maintained. The man in the waiting room with the twitching leg was a potential variable, but his agitation was born of pain, not malice. Her mind was a tactical computer, constantly running threat assessments on a loop, a program she could not shut down. This quiet, mundane life was the price she paid for peace, a penance for the violence she had wrought and the lives she had failed to save. The weight of it was a constant heavy pressure in her chest, a ghost limb of armor she could no longer wear. Vance, are you attempting to scrub the pattern off the floor, or are you actually going to clean that up sometime today? The voice was a whip crack of performative authority. It belonged to Dr. Adrian Thorne, the director of emergency medicine. He strode into the department like a conquering hero returning to his fiefdom. His suit was Italian silk, a shade of charcoal or coal so dark it seemed to absorb the sickly light of the room. His shoes clicked with an arrogant cadence on the linoleum. The scent of his cologne, a cloying and expensive musk, preceded him like an honor guard, an olfactory assault that always made Alara's nose twitch. He didn't just occupy a space, he colonized it. Alara didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the swirling orange puddle. "Almost done, doctor." Her voice was soft, flat, designed to be forgotten the moment it was heard. "Almost done," Thorne mimicked in a high, mocking tone to a pair of fawning interns who hovered in his wake. "In the time it's taken you to address that minor spill, a competent technician could have triaged 3 patients and restocked the entire trauma bay. Efficiency, Vance. It is the bedrock of emergency medicine, a concept you seem pathologically incapable of grasping." He didn't wait for a response. He swept past her, his entourage trailing behind, leaving a wake of his suffocating cologne. Alara took a slow, deliberate breath, in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. The box breathing technique, a simple tool to cage the animal that lived in her bones. The animal that knew a dozen ways to silence a man like Thorne with nothing more than a plastic mop handle. The insult slid off her, another layer added to the thick wall of her self-imposed exile. She finished cleaning the spill, her movements still measured, still slow. The mask of meek incompetence settled back into place, heavy as a lead shroud. She wrung out the mop head, the rough fibers coarse against the calloused skin of her palms, the network of fine, silvery scars that crisscrossed her knuckles, hidden for now. Later that morning, the hierarchy of North Haven General was on full display. A college kid came in with a dislocated shoulder from a rugby match, his face a mask of agony. Dr. Thorne saw an opportunity for a lesson, or rather, a performance. He gathered the interns and a few junior nurses around the gurney, turning the small cubicle into a makeshift amphitheater. "Observe, ladies and gentlemen," Thorne began, his voice resonating with the self-important boom of a stage actor. "The classic anterior dislocation. The patient presents with a visible deformity, the acromion appearing more prominent. Now, the textbook will give you a dozen different reduction techniques. The Stimson, the Milch, the Eskimo. All fine for academics." He paused for dramatic effect. "But in the real world, what we need is confidence and technique." He placed one hand on the patient's arm and the other on his shoulder, his movements theatrical, and unnecessarily large. Alara was in the background, ostensibly restocking a suture kit, but she watched him in the reflection of a stainless steel tray. His grip was wrong. He was relying on brute force, not leverage. He was going to cause the patient unnecessary pain and risk a fracture. Her own hands twitched. Remembering the silent, efficient pop of a joint being reset in the dark, the only sound a soldier's muffled gasp of relief. Thorne gave a mighty heave. The patient screamed, a raw, piercing sound that cut through the ER's general hum. The shoulder didn't budge. Thorne's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "He's resisting," he grunted, repositioning his grip. "Patient is tense. Someone give him 5 of midazolam." "He doesn't need drugs," Alara thought, her mind supplying the correction automatically. "You just need to rotate the humerus externally, apply gentle traction, and adduct. It's a machine. You have to respect the mechanics." But she said nothing. She simply continued counting packets of 4-0 nylon, her face a blank canvas. It was not her place. Her place was here, in the quiet, in the background. Finally, with another agonizing pull and a sickening crunch, the shoulder went back in. The patient sagged against the pillows, sweat beading on his forehead. Thorne, breathing heavily, straightened his tie and basked in the nervous applause of the interns. "See? Decisiveness. That is the key." He caught Alara's eye in the reflection. "Vance, the supply closet in Trauma Bay 2 is a disaster. I want it inventoried and reorganized. Top to bottom now." "Understood, doctor." It was janitor's work, a demeaning, pointless task designed to reinforce her position at the bottom of the food chain. The closet was a cramped, windowless box that smelled of dust and expired latex. She knelt on the cold floor, pulling out boxes of catheters and chest tubes, her mind drifting. The confined space reminded her of the belly of a striker vehicle, the smell of hot metal and diesel fumes, the nervous energy of the men packed in beside her, their lives in her hands. She had been a sergeant major then, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. They called her the Ghost, because she moved with a silence that was unnatural, and because she had a habit of bringing men back from the brink of death, a specter pulling souls back from the other side. Here, she was just Vance. Butterfingers Vance, a young nurse with bright, curious eyes and a name tag that read Maya, appeared in the doorway. She held out a styrofoam cup. "Coffee," she offered, her voice a little hesitant. "Figured you could use it. Dr. Thorne can be a lot." Alara looked at the offering. It was a small act of kindness, a crack in the wall of her isolation. She took the cup, her rough fingers brushing against Maya's. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Before Maya could respond, Thorne's voice echoed down the hall. "Nurse Ramirez, are you on a break? We have patients to see. Stop wasting time fraternizing with the help." Maya flinched as if struck. She gave Alara an apologetic look and scurried away, leaving Alara alone in the closet with the warm cup in her hands. The coffee tasted bitter. She drank it anyway. The warmth was a small comfort against the encroaching cold of her memories. The afternoon brought in 2 soldiers from the nearby base. One, a corporal named Evans with a mop of sandy hair, had a sprained wrist. The other, a burly sergeant named Diaz, had a shallow cut over his eye that needed a few stitches. They were loud, full of bravado, and treated the ER like a brief shore leave from their real lives. They were boys, playing at being men, and the sight of them made Alara's chest ache with a familiar hollow pain. She was tasked with bringing Diaz a basin and some sterile water. As she set it down on the tray beside him, her hand slipped, and a roll of gauze clattered to the floor. Evans laughed. "Whoa, careful there. Butterfingers. We need that stuff to patch us up." Diaz grinned, wincing as the movement pulled at his cut. "Easy, Corporal. She's doing her best." He looked at Alara, his eyes crinkling. "No offense, Mom." Alara just gave a small, awkward smile and bent to retrieve the gauze. "None taken, Sergeant." The use of his rank surprised him. Most civilians didn't bother. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of professional assessment passing over his face before he dismissed it. She was just a clumsy tech. She moved on, the soldiers' boisterous laughter following her. They didn't see the way she rolled her feet when she walked, heel to toe, a habit learned from years of moving silently over broken ground. They didn't see the way her eyes scanned the room, constantly checking, constantly assessing. They just saw the mask, and the mask was perfect. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Thorne's campaign of petty tyranny escalated. It moved from verbal burbs to active sabotage. Alara's request for a weekend off, submitted a month in advance, was mysteriously deleted from the system. She was assigned back-to-back double shifts, A grueling test of endurance that left her bone-weary but did little to crack her composure. One afternoon, a critical patient chart went missing. Thorne launched a frantic public search, finally discovering it, tucked behind a supply cabinet in a hallway Alara had just cleaned. He wrote her up for negligence, his signature a self-satisfied flourish on the official reprimand form. Alara stood before his large mahogany desk and accepted the write-up without a word. She knew he had moved the chart. She had seen him do it out of the corner of her eye while he thought she was distracted. But to challenge him was to break her silence, to step out of the shadows. The price of peace was this daily humiliation, this slow grinding erosion of her dignity. But her dignity had been forged in crucibles far hotter than this man's ego. She had held the hands of dying men who whispered messages for their mothers. She had performed a thoracotomy with a Leatherman tool in the back of a bouncing Humvee. A paper reprimand was nothing. Still, the pressure was building. The wall was beginning to show hairline fractures. One evening, while changing the sheets on a gurney, her hand brushed against a fresh bloodstain, still warm and slick. For a split second, she wasn't in North Haven General. She was back in the dust, the sun beating down, the air thick with the coppery smell of blood. Sergeant Miller was on the ground, his eyes wide with surprise, a dark, blossoming stain spreading across his chest. He was saying her name, his voice a gurgle. "Ghost, I." She blinked, and the ear snapped back into focus. Her jaw was clenched, so tight it ached. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the bedrail. A memory of another officer, a lieutenant full of bluster and bad tactics, flashed through her mind. He had ignored her warnings, pushed his men into a kill zone, and had gotten half the platoon wiped out for a piece of worthless ground. Thorne had the same empty confidence, the same fatal arrogance. It was a personality type she knew all too well. It was the kind that created ghosts. She forced her hand to relax, took another slow, centering breath. The quiet. She had to hold on to the quiet. It was all she had left. The cataclysm began not with a bang, but with a shrill, insistent ringing. It was the red phone, a direct line to regional emergency services, a relic from a pre-digital age that was reserved for only the most dire of circumstances. It hadn't rung in over 3 years. Every head in the ER snapped towards it. A tense silence fell, the normal cacophony of beeps and voices suddenly muted. A senior nurse answered it, her face paling as she listened. She hung up, her hand trembling. She looked at Dr. Thorne. "Code Black," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "Mass casualty. Industrial explosion at the chemical plant on the south side. They're saying dozens of victims. Burns, blast injuries, chemical exposure. They're all coming here." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then it shattered into pure, unadulterated chaos. Nurses scrambled for supplies. Doctors shouted for information that no one had. The air crackled with panic. The controlled chaos of the ER had become a runaway chain reaction, a meltdown of the system. At the center of the storm stood Dr. Adrian Thorne. His face was ashen, his usual air of supreme confidence evaporated. He was shouting orders, but they were superficial, contradictory, and useless. "Get me stats. Someone prep OR3. I need every gurney we have in the ambulance bay. Where are the damn crash carts?" His voice, usually a tool of command, was now just more noise in the rising tide of panic. His hands, which had so theatrically reset a shoulder hours before, were visibly shaking. He grabbed a tablet, trying to look up protocols for chemical burns, his fingers stabbing uselessly at the screen. He was a king whose castle was collapsing around him, and he had no idea what to do. In stark contrast, Alara Vance became preternaturally calm. The moment the words "Code Black" were spoken, the heavy, persistent pressure in her chest vanished. The weight of her anonymity, the burden of her past, it all lifted, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. The frantic noise of the ER faded into manageable static, the background noise of a complex problem set. Her heart rate, which had spiked with the alarm, dropped to a slow, powerful 60 beats per minute. Her senses sharpened. She could smell the fear in the room, a sharp, metallic tang underneath the antiseptic. She could see the entire layout of the ER not as a series of rooms, but as a tactical map, a battlefield waiting for a commander. The ghosts were silent. The ghost was awake. The first wave of victims arrived, a tide of broken bodies and terrified screams. The doors slid open again and again, admitting gurneys bearing the gruesome results of fire, force, and poison. The ER was instantly overwhelmed. It was a war zone. Alara moved through it, her previous slowness gone, replaced by an inhuman efficiency. She wasn't running. She was flowing, a current of purpose in an ocean of chaos. She placed a pressure dressing on a spurting wound, started an IV on a patient with severe burns, her hands sure and steady. She wasn't giving orders, not yet. She was observing, assessing, identifying the critical points of failure in the system. And the most critical point of failure was Dr. Thorne. He stood over a gurney, bearing a man with massive facial trauma, and labored, gurgling breaths. The man's chest was rising and falling unevenly, a clear sign of a tension pneumothorax, but his face was a mess of blood and swelling. Thorne, his eyes wide with panic, focused only on the most obvious injury. His airway is compromised, Thorne yelled, grabbing a laryngoscope. I need to intubate. Now. Alara saw it in a split second. The man's larynx was crushed. Forcing a tube down his throat would not only be impossible, it would tear what was left of his trachea and kill him instantly. He needed a surgical airway. He needed it 30 seconds ago. This was the critical moment, the point of no return. Her core duty, the one drilled into her being through years of training and blood, to preserve life, overrode her personal mission to remain hidden. The quiet was over. She moved. It was not a walk, but an arrival. She was suddenly at Thorne's side. Her movement so economical it was almost invisible. She placed a hand on his forearm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her touch was not a request. It was a command. No. The word was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the surrounding noise like a diamond through glass. It was flat, cold, and held the absolute authority of life and death. Thorne stared at her, his mind struggling to process the defiance. What did you say? He sputtered, his face a mask of enraged disbelief. Vance, get your hands off me. Get away from my patient. Alara didn't waste time arguing. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked him in the eye. The meek, downcast gaze was gone. Her eyes were now chips of glacial ice, analytical, devoid of emotion, and utterly terrifying. In that single look, the clumsy, slow ear tech named Vance disintegrated. The mask shattered. What stood there in her place was Sergeant Major Alara Vance, the ghost. She didn't just push him aside. She used his own forward momentum against him, a subtle shift of her weight, a perfectly balanced displacement of his center of gravity that sent him stumbling back a step, off balance and sputtering. In the same fluid motion, her other hand darted to a nearby instrument tray and came up with a number 10 scalpel. Her posture, once apologetic, snapped ramrod straight. She was no longer hiding. She was commanding. You'll kill him, she stated, not as an opinion, but as a tactical fact. Her attention was already on the patient. I need a cricothyrotomy kit now. Her voice had dropped an octave, losing all its previous hesitance. It was a combat voice, a tone that expected and received instant obedience. Maya, the young nurse, was standing nearby, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. She had seen Thorne's fatal error, had seen Alara's impossible transformation. While others were frozen in shock, Maya reacted. She spun on her heel and grabbed the kit, her training overriding her fear of Thorne's authority. Here, she said, slapping it into Alara's outstretched hand. Alara's fingers moved with a blur of practiced motion. She tilted the patient's head back, her thumb and forefinger finding the cricothyroid membrane in a fraction of a second. There was no hesitation. The scalpel made a quick, precise vertical incision, then a horizontal one through the membrane. A soft pop. She inserted the handle of the scalpel and twisted it 90 degrees to open the airway. Then she inserted the tube. A soft, beautiful hiss of air. The patient's chest rose evenly. The frantic gurgling stopped. He was breathing. The entire procedure had taken less than 10 seconds. Alara didn't pause to admire her work. She was already scanning the room, her brain triaging the entire chaotic scene. Maya, she barked, her voice sharp. This one is stable for now. Get a chest tube kit and meet me at the gurney by the door. He's got a tension pneumothorax. You! She pointed to a terrified-looking intern. Get me 2 units of O-negative and a pressure bag. Move! The intern, who had been frozen like a deer in headlights, jerked into motion as if zapped by a cattle prod. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Thorne finally roared, finding his voice. He lunged forward, trying to grab her arm. This is assault. You are fired. Security. Alara didn't even look at him. Her focus was absolute. As he reached for her, a deep voice cut through the chaos. I wouldn't do that if I were you, sir. It was Sergeant Diaz. He and Corporal Evans had gotten off their gurneys. Their minor injuries were forgotten. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a human wall between Thorne and Alara. Their earlier teasing expressions were gone, replaced by a look of profound, almost religious awe. They were soldiers. They recognized a real commander when they saw one. Thorne's authority was a title on a name badge. Alara's was primal, earned, and undeniable. She knows what she's doing, Evans added, his voice steady. Alara glanced at them, a flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes. Diaz. Evans. You can walk, you can work. Gurney 4, arterial bleed from the left leg. I need direct pressure. High and tight. Use your body weight. Don't let up until I tell you to. Go. Yes, Mom, they said in unison, the mom instinctive, a reflex of respect for true command. They moved immediately, their actions crisp and efficient. Alara became the conductor of the symphony of crisis. She moved from patient to patient, a whirlwind of lethal competence. She jammed her thumb into a gaping neck wound, occluding a severed carotid artery against the cervical spine. She directed one nurse to start an IO drill into a patient's tibia when his veins had collapsed, talking her through the procedure with calm, precise instructions. She spotted the telltale signs of organophosphate poisoning in a victim who had been written off as a lost cause and ordered an immediate atropine injection. Her commands were short, clear, and brutally effective. Tourniquet, high on the limb. Don't be afraid to hurt him. I need a needle decompression. 14th gauge, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, now. Tag him black. He's gone. Move to the next one. The staff, who moments before had been flailing in panic, now had a focal point. They recognized true competence, and they gravitated towards it, their fear replaced by a desperate need for direction. The established chain of command evaporated. They bypassed the sputtering, impotent Dr. Thorne, their eyes fixed on Alara. Maya became her shadow, anticipating her needs. A blur of motion fetching supplies and carrying out orders. The ER, which had been on the verge of collapse, was transformed into a ruthlessly efficient trauma unit. It was a masterclass in battlefield medicine, conducted on the linoleum floors of a civilian hospital. And on the sidelines, stripped of his title, his authority, and his relevance, Adrian Thorne could only stand and watch, a ghost in his own kingdom, as the quiet, clumsy tech he had tormented saved every life he would have lost. Hours later, the storm had passed. The last of the critical patients had been stabilized and moved to the ICU or the operating room. The ER was a wreck, littered with discarded wrappers, blood-soaked gauze, and the exhausted bodies of the staff. But the chaos was gone. A weary, functional calm had settled over the department. Alara stood at a sink, scrubbing blood and chemical residue from her hands and forearms. The hot water was a balm on her aching muscles. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The heavy pressure was back in her chest, the weight of the quiet life she had just sacrificed. She had shown them the ghost, and you could never put a ghost back in the bottle. The door to the staff lounge swung open. It was Dr. Thorne. His face was a thunderous mask of fury, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. He pointed a trembling finger at her. You, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. You are finished. I am bringing you up before the board on charges of insubordination, reckless endangerment, and practicing medicine without a license. You assaulted me. You countermanded my direct orders. You will never work in a hospital again. You are fired, Vance. Do you hear me? Fired. Alara turned off the water and slowly dried her hands on a rough paper towel. She met his gaze, her eyes flat and tired. She didn't have the energy to argue. She had done what she had to do. She would accept the consequences. As Thorne opened his mouth to continue his tirade, the main doors of the ER slid open with a soft whoosh. 2 men in military police uniforms entered, followed by a man in a crisp Army Class A uniform. He was tall, lean, with short-cropped gray hair and the quiet, absolute confidence of a man accustomed to holding lives in his hands. A silver eagle insignia gleamed on each of his shoulders. He was a full-bird colonel. The colonel's presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room.